Hello, thank you for joining us today to learn about our long-range planning study that we are conducting. I am Luis Montoya. I am the Chief Planning Officer at DART, and I'm going to be leading you through today some background information and hopefully engaging with you to answer some questions and direct you to share some feedback with us. All the information that I'm going to be sharing is going to be made available on our website. This is an opportunity today for me to try to talk through some of it and to hopefully take your questions. So please do feel free to enter them into the chat. But also, this is just the beginning. This is really the first public event that we're doing. We're going to have a number of also virtual Zoom engagements. All that information is available on our website, www.riderdart.com/plan. There's also a survey available. We're really hoping to get a lot of detailed feedback on how we can improve our services by folks taking that survey on riderdart.com/plan. Hopefully you already know a little bit about DART, but I just wanted to emphasize that we have a number of services that we provide. By far and away, our bus service, what we call fixed route, that travels on a set schedule, on a set route, is our most heavily used. We also have a rideshare service, which is a van pool service that allows long distance commuters to get together and more economically travel to work. And we also have our paratransit service, which is a door-to-door service that's offered for those who are not able to ride the fixed route bus to make sure that they can still get where they need to go. The majority of people who ride DART say that they ride DART to get to work, to medical appointments, and shopping. So we know that DART is a major part of driving our local economy and helping get everyone where they need to be. This is a map of our bus service area showing the 12 DART member communities. You can see that we have bus routes into every member community. As I'll get into a little bit of detail in the presentation, not all service is equal. Some of the routes that are shown only travel during certain days of the week, or on certain times of the day. And the reason for that, as we'll get into, is just that demand varies. And we have a number of things that we look at in terms of ridership and the different destinations. But what we really need to hear is from our customers, from members of the public, about how these routes are serving them, where we have the right days of the week, the right times of the day, even the right type of service. Our main service, as I mentioned, is that fixed route bus service, but we also have our on-call services, which are shown in purple, which are more of a door-to-door service. And as we'll discuss, there's more options that are potentially available to us to expand on and evolve how we deliver service. And that's all the type of feedback that we're looking to get either from you today or via our survey online. We've had surveys in the past. We also get requests from customers fairly frequently. And so we have a general idea about some of the ways that people have asked us in the past to improve on our service. People are really looking to get where they want to go faster, wanting to see more frequency of buses, more shorter travel times, less time stuck in traffic. They'd also like to see more areas served, additional weekend service, earlier or later service, and more benches and shelters at bus stops. Now as I mentioned, we've received this type of feedback in the past, and I think what we want to do right now through our survey and through these engagement events is try to get more detail as to exactly where people are trying to get to, what times of day, and to start to consider how we can deliver on that service so that as we look towards the future, we can plan accordingly. Over the past few years, we've actually been able to act on some of that feedback and those public requests that we've received. I'm showing here a map of various improvements that we've implemented since 2018. And that was really following up on some public outreach that was done in 2016. And what we were able to do was by finding some scheduling efficiencies, we were able to cost neutrally provide service earlier on weekday mornings so that people could get to work to shifts starting as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. We now have buses that are running in the 4 o'clock hour. We also have more midday service on our busiest routes. We were able to get to 20-minute headways on a handful of our busiest routes. We implemented a new crosstown route on Euclid and Douglas that allows people to travel east and west across the region through several member communities without having to transfer downtown. And there's been a number of businesses that we have expanded service to connect to. A couple of notable examples are the Hy-Vee Commissary in Ankeny that Route 4 connects to, the Amazon Fulfillment Center on Route 17 in Bondurant. And then there's a number of other key destinations that we've been able to serve over the past couple of years. Some of that has been through grants. Some of it has been through partnerships with those businesses and them providing revenue to DART so that we can expand that service. And some of it has been just by being able to rearrange some services around and find efficiencies. We've also added more than 20 bus shelters over the past few years, really taking that request very seriously. In addition to those service improvements, we've also been looking at our technology and our vehicles. Late in 2020, we launched our first electric buses that are primarily being used on Route 60, but also being used throughout our service area. And that was really an opportunity for us to think about how the technology on vehicles is evolving and how we can possibly even reduce the life cycle costs of owning and operating vehicles while also producing environmental benefits. We also have some smaller buses that we've introduced into the fleet. I have a picture in the upper right of a 30-foot heavy-duty bus. So these are buses that are being used on our regular bus routes, but on those routes that maybe don't have so much ridership that they justify having the larger bus. And so we can have a little bit of a smaller bus, a little more fuel efficient, a little less cost up front for purchasing the bus. We also have made a number of technology improvements for the customers. We've replaced all of our fare boxes so that they are accepting many types of payment, including mobile payment. We have created the MyDart app and have trip planning and mobile payment features on that app, as well as Wi-Fi on board all our buses. So we've been trying to be responsive to the various requests that we've received and some of the ways in which the industry is evolving. However, there are still a number of challenges that DART faces. One, and it's an opportunity as well as a challenge, is that our region is growing. And by some estimates, we could reach 1 million people over the next 20 years or so. A lot of that growth is happening on the outskirts of our region as we expand, but also a lot of growth is happening downtown. And there's been some great success stories of more housing and jobs being created downtown. Now, of course, those housing and jobs downtown are easier to serve by transit because there are existing routes, because there are busy corridors, destinations are closer together. And so as we think about that development pattern in our region, it's not going to be as easy just to use a bus to serve destinations that are further spread out, that are farther from downtown, and that maybe don't have as many direct connections to each other and to housing. And so that's one of the challenges that we'll be looking at as part of this study. Additionally, DART has limited funding options. We do receive funding from the federal government, but the majority of DART funding comes from local property taxes. And so we know that we want to be responsible with the taxes that we collect. And so when we think about how do we meet the growing needs of the region, how do we meet the evolving needs, and we know that there are unmet needs, mobility needs, how do we do so in a way that's fiscally responsible? And can we even consider and pursue additional revenue measures to help support DART? The transportation industry itself is changing and evolving. People's preferences are changing. More and more people are looking to have options, whether those are active transportation options like walking and biking, whether it's having more different types of transit that to suit their needs, or even looking to private sector models like Uber or Lyft or scooter sharing to have the flexibility to get to where they need to go. Most of these, increasingly, these options are connected to mobile phones, which provides users the ability to plan their trips and book them and even pay for them all over the mobile platform. So that provides that flexibility. Also increasingly electric fleets, whether it's personal electric cars, the electric buses that I talked about DART is piloting, or things like electric scooters and electric bikes. And increasingly we're seeing the trend towards electric being one that can be cleaner, but also providing more power to some of those personal mobility devices to get people where they need to go efficiently and quickly. So right now we are embarking on a study to plan for the future. And so we want to think about some of those trends that I just mentioned and how we can optimize the service that we have today so that we're being as responsible as we can be with the resources that we have. But also we want to hear from the public about how we can evolve our services to meet their needs, whether it's different areas that we're not currently serving, different times of the day, or even different types of services that might be more flexible, which we'll get into a little bit. I mentioned some of those innovative services that consumers are moving toward, such as Uber or Lyft or bike sharing, scooter sharing, and those types of things. We want to think about what is DART's role in those things, and can some of those services be brought to help to enhance our transit network. And all of this will come together in a long-term vision for DART services. This is an overview of the timeline of how we'll get to a plan. Right now, we're in the process of studying existing conditions. I'm going to share some of what we've found as we've looked at the data and our performance. But then really we're focused on collecting public input. Really want to hear through engagement opportunities such as this and our online survey, what does the public need? What are the unmet needs in the community? How can we improve on what we have? Over the summer, we'll be drafting some recommendations for how our services can look in the future, and we'll be back for public input in the late summer or early fall on those draft recommendations, and that public input will then influence what the final plan is to be done by the end of 2021. So now I'm going to talk about some of the analysis that we've been doing and what we see as some of the existing trends. Now I'll preface this to say that we chose to use data that was before the pandemic because, of course, over the last year, we have seen major changes in how people travel, including ridership on DART. And so we hope and we expect that as the pandemic recedes and people get more comfortable traveling, that more people are returning to their normal activities, including commuting, that we will return to something closer to these pre-pandemic conditions. However, we do know that there will be some things that will fundamentally evolve, and we'll talk about that in this presentation. So the first thing I want to just give a quick overview is that the way we plan our bus services is that we try to tailor the service to meet the demand. And so whether it's having those routes that provide the most frequency and the most service 7 days a week, those are really going to be the routes that are connecting the most major destinations and that have the highest ridership, because that's where it makes the most sense for us to make that investment. And I'll show a map and show some ridership around that. But we also know that there's areas of our region that need transit that maybe just don't have quite as high of a need. So there's not quite as much ridership. And so those, we might call them coverage routes, where we try to provide some service, but it's less frequent, and it may not be throughout the whole day, or it might only be 5 days a week. Then we have our express routes, which are really just running during commute times and are designed for long distance travel. So they have less bus stops or further distance between bus stops. They have park and rides that people can drive to the bus stop, and then our express routes get on the freeway to come into downtown. And then lastly, we have our on-call services, which are door-to-door shuttles. This is different from our paratransit. Paratransit is restricted for only those who are not able to ride fixed route. But on-call is available in several member communities by booking a day ahead of time. And that's a door-to-door service that we have where we don't have fixed route bus service. Here's a map of the fixed route bus service ridership. The yellow lines are all the DART routes, and the blue circles are the ridership. And so, as you can see, the routes, it varies, ridership varies. We have bigger circles where we have very busy destinations, many times on corridors that have dense housing and jobs and services, but also where we have nodes of commercial activity, things like malls or even park and rides on our express routes. And so you'll see we have those bubbles throughout our member communities. Some corridors have lots of high ridership routes. Some corridors have lots of high ridership bus stops. Other corridors just have a few high ridership bus stops. And as I mentioned, our strategy is really to tailor the service to try to meet those demands. But we really want to hear from customers as to how we're doing. Are we balancing those needs appropriately? And that's why we're really hoping to get folks to take our survey on ridedart.com/plan. This is that same map, but just highlighting those busiest routes. We have 6 routes that carry 2/3 of our boardings. And these are really those routes that are traveling 7 days a week, that have service all day. Many of them have 20-minute frequency all day. And these are the ones where we do end up, expending a fair amount of resources, but we also generate a lot of ridership. And so, and we think that has a large part to do with the density of housing and the concentration of jobs and services along these corridors. Most of the other routes that you see that aren't highlighted in red are ones that have less service on them. So they're all less frequent, or some of them are only operating during certain times of the day and certain days of the week. We looked at a number of other data points, and I'm going to share a list of them a little bit later in the presentation. But we've looked at ridership, we've looked at land use, where people live, how dense the housing is, where the jobs are. We've also looked at growth. We've looked at data at how the communities are expecting to grow. And so we see those growth patterns happening largely in the outerlying areas of our region, but also a fair amount happening downtown. We also were able to get travel data from cell phones. So this is more than just transit data, but also whether you know it or not, the apps that you use track your movements. And so we're able to get anonymized data so that we don't know who's going where, but we do see travel patterns. And that is able to give us a sense of how people are moving about the region. So some of those findings that we had from that data analysis was that we really do see some opportunities for better connecting people between where they live and where they work. In particular, as we see jobs growing more in the outerlying areas of our region. And a good example of that is that a lot of the service sector jobs are increasingly in the suburban communities of our region, but a lot of the more attainable housing, workforce housing is in the core of our region. And so how do we connect where people have their jobs to where they can afford to live? And we see that as a major opportunity to improve and enhance on our services. Also, I mentioned that we purchased some data, and we saw that even though our bus routes are mostly set up to run in and out of Des Moines, a lot of the regional travel patterns are not in and out of Des Moines. And so we have people commuting in between suburbs, or especially on the weekends, running their errands, seeing their friends and family, in patterns that are not strictly in and out of downtown. And so we'll want to think about through this process, how do we serve those needs that aren't just strictly in and out of Des Moines? Or how can we get people where they need to go with having less transfers than they might currently have to do on DART? And the last thing is just that housing growth and that job growth that I mentioned, and where that growth is occurring. I know we have a couple of comments that are coming in, and I'm gonna pause in just a little bit to talk through some of those. So I mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the impacts that it's had on DART. What we've seen is that weekday ridership did decline, as well as weekends, but we did see a fair number of people stay on DART. So even when the strictest restrictions were in place from the state, when people were really being encouraged to social distance and only travel for essential purposes, we still saw 40% of normal ridership levels. And to us, that says that a lot of our customers are people who have those essential jobs, who need to get to work despite a pandemic, who don't have the option of working from home, and or who rely on DART to get to their own services, to go to the grocery store, to get to the medical appointments. And so that tells us a lot about the importance of our service to our region. But then also we saw that weekend ridership actually didn't decline very much throughout the pandemic. We still had 70% of normal ridership levels on the weekends. And to us, that tells us also that people are really relying, the people who ride on the weekends really rely on DART. And so we want to look at what we can do potentially to, especially given some of the requests that we've gotten in the past, to support those needs. And while I mentioned that there are definitely some trends from the pandemic that we expect will just fundamentally change how people travel, I think a big one is office workers, and just the flexibility and the work locations will just evolve as a result of the pandemic. I think we still don't have quite a great picture of exactly how and to what degree, but I think it's safe to say that the pandemic has definitely caused people to change their habits. And so we may see continued impacts on express routes. Express routes were declining ridership before the pandemic because of people's changing commute patterns and where they work. But we do still see very strong demand, and in fact increasing so as the weather's gotten better and as more people are getting vaccinated on local routes. So I'm going to pause here. I want to remind folks to take our survey at ridedart.com/plan. I have a little more I want to go over, but I do know that a couple of questions came in that I want to be able to speak to. So Kathy, I saw that you were asking what are the plans for Waukee and West Des Moines and Urbandale. It's a great point. These are areas that we have some service in, but it's mostly limited to weekday service, or in the case of Waukee, we actually don't have any service at all. Waukee isn't currently a DART member community. We do get a fair amount of requests, and I'd say it's probably one of the top places that we get requests for that we don't currently have service to. So part of service in Waukee, so part of the answer to the question about service in Waukee is Waukee deciding to be a member community of DART, and then DART can collect revenue and work with Waukee to provide service. But in terms of West Des Moines and Urbandale, on the weekends, it's a very fair point that our services are definitely down in those areas, if at all. And so I think what we want to hear from is where exactly are the needs, so that we can tailor our services to meet those needs. Because we have limited resources, and so to the extent that we can target them, if it's certain routes or certain destinations, that's the type of feedback that we'd like to hear in our survey. There's some really pointed questions in there about where people are going, how often they need to get there. That will help us make some of those route planning decisions. Another question from Susan was about the evolving workforce, and how, as the generation of baby boomers ages, that they are driving less, and that maybe some of the newer mobility options like Lyft aren't a great choice, and especially given COVID and our desire to maintain distance. And that some of those services aren't operating as well because of lack of drivers. And so the question was specifically about a bus down Aurora into Urbandale, and that's really good feedback for us to figure out, exactly where people need it. That giving a specific example of Aurora as a corridor where bus service might be needed, where kind of acknowledging the limits of some of the newer mobility options, which I'm actually going to get into next as well, so we can talk through some of that. So thank you. So now I'm going to talk about where we go from here. How do we we're going to continue to collect public feedback, but I also wanted to set the stage for how we do some of our transit planning. And really our goal here at DART is to get you where you need to go. We know that we provide an essential service to our community, helping people get to work, helping people get to their jobs, but that we want to do so efficiently and effectively. We want to do so by minimizing wait times, minimizing travel time. A lot of times that has to do with focusing our resources so that we can have the right frequency on the right routes to carry the most people, but also having routes that are direct and not, meandering through neighborhoods, but rather taking direct routes, quicker routes on major corridors, serving major destinations. And lastly, our goal is to have bus stops that are convenient, comfortable, safe, and accessible. So that has to do with making sure that there's a comfortable place to wait, that it's safe, it's lit, and that there's ADA accessibility and ideally sidewalks. How we plan that service is a big part of it is data analysis. I mentioned earlier that we did we're doing currently some existing conditions analysis, and we're looking at a whole number of things. We get data from our own systems, from the census, from some of our regional partners like the MPO, where we're able to look at all these data inputs and try to get a sense of what the demand is. A big input into how we make our planning decisions, though, is also public input. And so the requests that we receive on an ongoing basis, the surveys that we do, like the survey we're doing right now on ridedart.com/plan, as well as feedback from some of our business leaders and business partners, social media, public meetings. And all of that goes into our decisions about how to plan our service. Not only things like frequency and span, which is what hours of the day is the bus available, but also even fundamentally the service type, which I'll get into. Increasingly, there are more and more options for how people can travel. We know that our fixed route service, our big buses, are going to continue to be the backbone of our service. It is the most efficient way to move people, to have more people on a vehicle, and it's a smart use of our resources to try to move the most people we can. However, because of some of the trends that I mentioned, it's not all of our demand is only on busy corridors with major destinations. A lot of the demand is spread out, and we want to think about how we can serve all 12 of our member communities and serve the various needs that people have, be they by time of day or day of the week. And we think that there could be a role for more on-demand services, whether they're on-demand services that can travel door to door rather than just stay on a fixed route. Whether those services are operated by DART, like our on-call services are today, and that's pictured in our lower left, where we use a smaller vehicle that has a wheelchair lift, has a DART driver, but could be made to be available on demand, or whether it's partnering with a private service like Uber or Lyft or bike share to help provide people options. But all of this are things that we're looking to get feedback on. In the survey, there's some questions about whether these types of services would work for you. We definitely want to hear what the challenges might be. And then as we develop potential options, there'll definitely be a lot more feedback to make sure that we're picking things that are accessible and that are going to be useful for our customers. Just to give you just a high-level look at what some of the recommendations could look like. Of course, we want to look at our existing bus service and think about how we can improve on those routes that we have today. Thinking about, where does it make sense to have more frequency or to just serve areas that we don't serve today. That will definitely be a part of this plan. We'll also want to think about bus stops and how we can make them safe, comfortable, and accessible with things like shelters or benches, but also how to provide more mobility options by having things like bike parking and bike sharing and potentially even things like connections with car sharing, pick up and drop off for Uber and Lyft. As more and more options are available for people, and we want to make it so that they can connect between those options and DART. I mentioned some of the emerging solutions that we are investigating, including more on-demand type services. Just to give you an idea of how those on-demand type services might be used, there are some bus routes that just don't have very much ridership. And it could be more cost effective for us to pay for a service like Uber or Lyft to carry the few customers who have the needs to travel in that area. An example of that is the pilot that we started in 2019 in a section of Urbandale where we discontinued what was Route 73. We replaced it with a partnership with Uber and Yellow Cab. And at least before the pandemic, we saw ridership maintain, if not increase, through that. And because there were so few people needing service out in that area, it was actually more cost effective for DART to pay for Ubers and cabs than to have a bus that drove around mostly empty. We also think that these on-demand services can help people get to bus stops and actually enhance the reach of transit, especially in areas where destinations might be further from established bus routes or the walking environment might not be great. And if we can have more on-demand services or things like bike share to get people to bus stops, that would enhance the transit access. And then lastly, we think that there are plenty of areas that we're not currently serving, that we know there are unmet needs. And so we want to think about how some of these services might be able to help people get to some of those areas flexibly. So those are just some of the ideas that we know we're going to be considering, but really what we're looking for right now is we're looking for that public input. So really would like for you to go to our website, ridedart.com/plan, and give us your feedback on the survey. Also, I mentioned that there's going to be more public meetings. If maybe you're watching us on Facebook after when it was recorded and you still have some time to take a look at our website and see when there's going to be a Zoom public meeting for you to attend, and we can have more discussion about some of these topics. Some of our Zoom meetings are going to be tailored to individual communities so that those western suburbs, we can get maybe into more of those details, some of the questions that people asked about specific communities like Urbandale, about what are some of the service options there, and we'll be doing it live, and we can talk through some of that over Zoom. And so that public input will continue through the end of April. And then we will take that public input and we'll start to draft some recommendations, and we'll be back after the summer to share some of those recommendations and get more feedback. So that is the presentation that I had. I know that we have another comment coming in. Yeah, so it's a great comment from Sarah about people needing space on the bus for the things that they bring with them. And the example that she gave was grocery carts, and how there's not always space, a good spot to put a full grocery cart so that you feel like you're out of the way, and that you're not squished in your aisle with your cart. That's a great comment. That's something that's really helpful for us to think about as we think about the type of vehicle that we use and how that vehicle is configured on the inside. Really helpful, Sarah. Thank you. Just a last reminder to just go to our website, ridedart.com/plan, and fill out the survey that we have linked there. Really hoping to get as much detail as we can from our customers, from members of the community about how we can improve on our services so that as we plan for the future, we are able to respond to those needs. I am going to end this live session, but we encourage you to keep the comments coming in over Facebook or go on and take our survey. Leave us your thoughts and your comments there, or reach out to us through the various methods that are listed on our website. With that, just want to thank you all for joining us.